just 82 seconds, March the 22nd last year, the lives of 4 people were ended as Khalid Massoud drove into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge before stabbing a policeman to death. Today, at the opening of the inquest into their deaths, a hutched court number 1 of the Old Bailey was told of the moments of high and terrible drama in the lead-up to the attack. Then it was the turn of the relatives to describe how their lives had been torn apart, among them family and colleagues of PC Keith Palmer, who paid tribute to the brave officer who gave his life to protect others. Our correspondent Helena Lee is at the Old Bailey.
An emotional packed court one here at the Old Bailey as the same families got their chance to publicly remember their loved ones. As they did so, many of them were in tears, and their photographs of those who died in the attacks were put up on screens around the courtroom for everyone to see. Also, a minute's silence was observed in their memory.
Westminster Bridge, nearly a year and a half ago, an attack which the chief coroner said tore apart the lives of many by high and terrible drama. Today, the inquest began into those who died, giving families a chance to tell the hearing about them, who they were, and what they meant to their relatives. Kurt Cochrane was on holiday here yesterday, which had been his 56th birthday. A statement read out on behalf of his wife Melissa said, "I was so lucky to have had 25 wonderful years with the man of my dreams. He made me laugh every single day and cherish every single memory we made." The court heard that Leslie Rhodes, a pensioner known as Les, was a private man who always helped others and loved his job as a window cleaner. Aisha Fraid, her husband, told the court she lived and breathed for her daughters. They had 2. Andrea Christia was described as a lovely, enchanting young lady. Today would have been her 33rd birthday. And PC Keith Palmer, who was stabbed and killed in the attack. His sister said the best day of his life was when his daughter was born. The inquest will hear from specialist witnesses who will piece together what happened that day, and a second jury-led inquest will be held into the death of Khalid Massoud, the man who carried out the attack.
Well, Simon, just before lunch, the court saw stills from CCTV footage of Kurt Cochrane, the American tourist who was on that bridge who died in the attack. And those stills that were shown in court, you can see he was standing on the bridge with his wife Melissa standing next to him, and the car approaching them. As he saw the car, he pushed his wife Melissa out of the way to safety. He died in that attack. Now, the judge here has said that he hopes the inquest will give some comfort to the families and also answer the many questions that they still have. And the inquest will continue here today and will go on, Simon, for around 5 weeks.
A former minister is working into the deaths of the 5 people killed in the Westminster Bridge attack in March, has described how the lives of many were torn apart in these seconds. Attacker Khalid Massoud raced his car along the pavement, driving into pedestrians before jumping out and stabbing to death PC Keith Palmer outside Parliament. The start of the inquest proceedings, a minute's silence was observed for the victims, the British, American and Romanian. Our correspondent Helena Lee reports now from the Old Bailey.
Westminster Bridge, nearly a year and a half ago, an attack which the chief coroner said tore apart the lives of many by high and terrible drama. Today, the inquest began into those who died, giving families a chance to tell the hearing about them, who they were, and what they meant to their relatives. Kurt Cochrane was on holiday here yesterday, would have been his 56th birthday. A statement read out on behalf of his wife Melissa said, "I was so lucky to have had 25 wonderful years with the man of my dreams. He made me laugh every single day and cherish every single memory we made." The court heard that Leslie Rhodes, a pensioner known as Les, was a private man who always helped others and loved his job as a window cleaner. Aisha Fraid, her husband, told the court she lived and breathed for her daughters. They had 2. Andrea Christia was described as a lovely, enchanting young lady. Today would have been her 33rd birthday. and PC Keith Palmer, who was stabbed and killed in the attack. His sister said the best day of his life was when his daughter was born. The inquest will hear from specialist witnesses who piece together what happened that day, and a second jury-led inquest will be held into the death of Khalid Massoud, the man who carried out the attack.
Well, with that report going on, that's been put by the correspondent Keith Gordon's at the Old Bailey. And Keith, just a little more on the kind of evidence, including the visual evidence that's been shared there today.
Yes, it was a very difficult day here for everyone in court number 1 at the Old Bailey. Judge Mark Lookrock warned that the footage that everyone was going to see was going to be graphic and shocking. Questioned by Jonathan Howe, QC, who's the lawyer for the inquest, Detective Superintendent John Crosby, who led the police investigation, he took the inquest through that video footage of the attack on the 22nd of March last year. So video footage that was taken from security cameras, from CCTV cameras, from dashboards of people's cars, and from members of the public.
Westminster.
82 seconds of that attack, and every moment of it was covered from many different angles, and that's what was shown in court today. Five people died. It's very distressing to watch. Family members had to leave the courtroom. Others who remained in court were clearly found it very difficult to view the footage that was on screens right around court number 1 here at the Old Bailey. As we watched in detail how the vehicle hit 4 people on Westminster Bridge, and then how PCP Palmer was chased, was stabbed, before his killer was then shot dead by armed officers.
Just a thought on the inquest as it continues. What kind of trend can we expect to see in terms of the evidence that's presented, and the kind of contributions that you expect from the
Well, the inquest is now going to go through in detail how each individual victim died. That's already started late this afternoon. And that is going to be very difficult. It is very harrowing, but that is the purpose of the inquest, to determine exactly how each victim died. It may well also look at the background checks on Khalid Massoud to see if there's any surveillance or what surveillance was carried out on him in previous years. And we also look at security arrangements that were in place in and around the Westminster area. Now, lawyers for the victims were able to ask some questions this afternoon, and there's a clear hint there that they've got many more questions to ask on these subjects and many more, but they want to hear in great and exact detail exactly how those events unfolded on March 22nd last year, and indeed any surveillance on the run-up to that. And as we heard, the inquest into the death of Khalid Massoud will be held independently at a later date.
Thanks very much for the video. 12 minutes past 5. Let's have a quick look at some of these other stories. The UK economy grew for us.
The hearing today has heard from witnesses and pedestrians who were on Westminster Bridge at the time that Kurt Cotson was hit by the car. One eyewitness broke down in tears in the witness box as she relived the moment of impact, and his wife, who survived but was badly injured,
Killed in the Westminster Terror attack last year, has heard how an American tourist saved his wife by pushing her out of the path of the vehicle being driven by Khalid Massoud. Kurt and Melissa Cochran had only been in London for 2 hours before Massoud launched his attack last March. Kurt was killed, but his wife survived. Our correspondent, Helena Lee, is at the Old Bailey for us.
The hearing today has heard from witnesses, pedestrians who were on Westminster Bridge at the time that Kurt Cotton was hit by the car. One eyewitness broke down in tears in the witness box as she relived the moment of impact, and his wife, who survived but was badly injured, also gave evidence in court into the inquest into her husband's death.
This morning, Melissa Cochran came to court to tell the hearing how she and her husband's trip to London ended after just 2.5 hours. She and Kurt Cotton, the first victim of the attack, had been visiting from America. From the witness box, she told the court she remembers the car being driven by Khalid Massoud approaching them, and then being on the ground. Her husband had pushed her to safety. She told the court she doesn't remember him doing that, but it was typical of him. Kylie Smith, a teacher, also gave evidence. She'd been in London with some students and was on the bridge when the attack happened. In tears, she told the court how she remembered seeing the American couple holding hands beforehand. Then she said the car came towards them. The man tried to pull his girlfriend behind him, tried to shield her from the impact. The man went over the car and just flew up in the air. There was chaos and panic after, she said. 3 others on the bridge died as Khalid Massoud drove into them over Westminster Bridge. He then got out and stabbed PC Keith Palmer, who died at the scene. The inquest will hear further evidence into Kurt Cochrane's death before hearing the inquest into the 4 other victims.
Well, that was Helen Lee reporting from the Old Bailey, where proceedings will continue this afternoon. The inquest examining the death of pensioner Leslie Rhodes. We'll bring you the latest from that inquest as we get it. The shortage of staff in the NHS. The inquest into the deaths of 5 people killed in the Westminster terror attack last year has heard how an American tourist saved his wife by pushing her out of the path of the vehicle driven by Khalid Massoud. Kurt and Melissa Cochrane had only been in London for 2 hours before Massoud launched his attack last March. Kurt was killed, his wife survived.
This morning, Melissa Cochrane came to court to tell the hearing how she and her husband's trip to London ended after just 2.5 hours. She and Kurt Cochrane, the first victim of the attack, had been visiting from America. From the witness box, she told the court she remembers the car being driven by Khalid Massoud approaching them and then being on the ground. Her husband had pushed her to safety. She told the court she doesn't remember him doing that, but it was typical of him. Kylie Smith, a teacher, also gave evidence. She'd been in London with some students and was on the bridge when the attack happened. In tears, she told the court how she remembered seeing the American couple holding hands beforehand. Then she said the car came towards them. The man tried to pull his girlfriend behind him, tried to shield her from the impact. The man went over the car and just flew up in the air. There was chaos and panic after, she said. 3 others on the bridge died as Khalid Massoud drove into them over Westminster Bridge. He then got out and stabbed PC Keith Palmer, who died at the scene. The inquest will hear further evidence into Kurt Cochrane's death before hearing the inquest into the 4 victims.
Well, let's go to Helen, who joins us now from the Old Bailey Live, and some very emotional, very difficult evidence today.
Yes, Simon, what's happening at the moment in court is we are hearing evidence into the inquest of Leslie Rhodes, 75 years old, a retired window cleaner. Now, in court earlier today, this footage was shown of Leslie Rhodes walking along Westminster Bridge on the day of the attack. He had been on his way back from a hospital appointment at St Thomas's Hospital, and the footage was played in court. You can see him from different angles walking along Westminster Bridge. The court then stopped that footage, and some stills were then shown of Leslie Rhodes being hit by Khalid Massoud's car. In court we heard as well that he was knocked into the air and dragged under Khalid Massoud's car. He was then taken to hospital where he never regained consciousness, and his niece yesterday in a pen portrait in court had told the court that he was a kind and loyal man. He would do anything to help anyone who needed it. We're also hearing now from a doctor, Dr. Gareth Lloyd. He works at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. He happened also to be on the bridge, on Westminster Bridge, at the time of that attack. He saw 3 people being hit by the car, and he was one of the first people to go and give assistance to Leslie Rhodes. So the evidence here is continuing, Simon. The hearing, the inquest into the deaths of the 5 people who died in that attack, is expected to last around 5 weeks.
Helena, thank you very much. Helena, leader at the Old Bailey. Theresa May has set out plans for the UK to be at the forefront of developing and producing
that report there by our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw. We'll have more reaction to that, and we'll be talking to some guests later on in the programme. Let's move to some of the days other news now then, because the inquest into the deaths of 5 people killed in the Westminster terror attack last year has heard how an American tourist saved his wife by pushing her out of the path of the vehicle driven by Khalid Masood. Spirit Times' Melissa Cochrane has only been in London for 2 hours before Masood launched his attack last March. Kurt was killed, but his wife survived. Our correspondent, Helena Lee, is at the Old Bailey with the latest on today's hearing. Helena?
Yes, Hugh, today we heard evidence from people who were on the bridge who saw Kurt Cochrane being hit by Khalid Masood's car. One eyewitness who was in the witness box giving evidence broke down in tears as she recalled the moment of the impact. And his widow, who was badly injured but survived the attack, also gave evidence into the inquest into her husband's death. This morning, Melissa Cochrane came to court to tell the hearing how she and her husband's trip to London ended after just 2.5 hours. She and Kurt Cochrane, the first victim of the attack, had been visiting from America. From the witness box, she told the court she remembers the car being driven by Khalid Masood approaching them and then being on the ground. Her husband had pushed her to safety. She told the court she doesn't remember him doing that, but it was typical of him. Kylie Smith, a teacher, also gave evidence. She'd been in London with some students and was on the bridge when the attack happened. In tears, she told the court how she remembered seeing the American couple holding hands beforehand. Then she said the car came towards them. The man tried to pull his girlfriend behind him, tried to shield her from the impact. The man went over the car and dust flew up in the air. There was chaos and panic after, she said. 3 others on the bridge died as Khalid Masood drove into them over Westminster Bridge. He then got out and stabbed PCQ Plummer, who died at the scene. The inquest will hear further evidence into Kurt Cochrane's death before hearing the inquest into the 4 other victims. Well, earlier today, the inquest into Letchworth Road, the retired window cleaner, 75 years old, that opened here at the Old Bailey. And a doctor, Dr. Gareth Lloyd, who had been on the bridge at the time of the attack, he gave evidence. He went over to try and treat Leslie Rhodes. In a touching moment, Hugh, at the end of his evidence, he publicly in court thanked the family for inviting him to Mr. Rhodes' funeral and said it was a privilege to attend. The hearing here continues tomorrow.
Helena, thanks very much once again for the latest there at the inquest at the Old Bailey. Helena Lee. 7 minutes past 5.
You're watching Afternoon Live. Andrea, she died from her injuries 2 weeks later. Andrea Burnhouse was speaking at the inquest, which is taking place at the Old Bailey. Helena Lee is there for us now. Helena.
Yes, Simon, today in court, the inquest has been hearing more evidence from those people who saw what happened to Andrea Christie and also the aftermath of rescue efforts trying to get her out of the River Thames. And we heard from one witness in court today, Michael Brown. He was driving his van on Westminster Bridge. At the time of the attack, he saw Andrea Christie being hit by Masood's car. He described in court how she was thrown around 10 feet into the air before falling into the River Thames. We also, as you said, heard from the boyfriend of Andrea Christie, who gave evidence to court and spoke about the moments before the attack. Andre Burnhouse, Andrea Christie's boyfriend, came to court this morning to tell the hearing how he frantically searched for his girlfriend after they were hit by Masood's car. The couple had been on holiday in London, doing what tourists do. They were on Westminster Bridge, enjoying the sights. Andrea Christie busy taking photographs like this one of Westminster. It turned out to be the last picture she took. In court, Andre Burnhouse was asked about the seconds before they were hit. He said, "I heard something hit something, and after that, at the same time, people were screaming. I saw the car come towards us.
and it was very quick.
No more.
Very quick.
I met you, mate.
He told the hearing he frantically
Join.
searched for his girlfriend,
Mark.
but couldn't find her. He only found her phone,
Join.
glasses, in a pool
Join
of blood.
Discord.
Andrea
And we
had
can
been
talk.
flung into the Thames. She died from her injuries 2 weeks
If you
after the attack.
I was on normal
Simon,
Facebook.
at the moment in court, witnesses were expecting to hear from
No,
the medical teams, the doctors, the nurses who looked after Andrea Christia after she was recovered from the Thames, taken into hospital, but she died, as I said, 2 weeks later. We were expecting as well later to have the inquest into PC Keith Palmer. He was the officer who was unarmed, uniformed, wearing body armour though, standing outside of the Houses of Parliament. He was stabbed and killed by Carly Masood. His inquest was expected to open a bit later on this afternoon. It all depends whether though they get through these witnesses first, but the hearing continues.
Helen Ali, thank you very much. Profits at the John Lewis
Even
branches have fallen.
going to Discord.
Group, which includes
That's
John
good.
Lewis department stores and Waitrose supermarkets,
Nah.
made a profit in the 6 months to late July of just £1.2 million.
I know. I know, Mark.
Its chairman said the
Going.
retail sector had seen the most promotional market in the
I'm not to Discord. I'm on any time. And you and me can chat.
Make a big noise about being different to other high street
I was
stores.
in the link
But today's figures make it clear it's under
to
the
your
same
email.
commercial pressures as
It's in your email.
rivals on the high street.
So I can send. Send an email to 09 over 09 at gmail.com.
Boyfriend of Andrea Christia, who was killed in last year's Westminster Bridge terror, has described how he frantically searched for his girlfriend after she was knocked into the River Thames by Khalid Masood's car. She died from her injuries 2 weeks later. Andrea Bernaz was speaking at the inquest into the attack, which is taking place at the Old Bailey, and my colleague Helena Lee is there for us to tell us about today's evidence. Helena?
Yes, Hugh, more harrowing evidence today. We heard from witnesses who saw what happened to Andrea Christia and the aftermath, the confusion, the chaos and the carnage, as one witness put it. Her family weren't in court here today. They were watching proceedings by video link from Romania, which is where Andrea was from. But her boyfriend came here to court today to tell the court about the moments before the attack.
Andre Bernaz, Andrea Christia's boyfriend, came to court this morning to tell the hearing how he frantically searched for his girlfriend after they were hit by Masood's car. The couple had been on holiday in London, doing what tourists do. They were on Westminster Bridge, enjoying the sights. Andrea Christia busy taking photographs like this one of Westminster. It turned out to be the last picture she took. In court, Andre Bernaz was asked about the seconds before they were hit. He said, "I heard something hit something, and after that, at the same time, people were screaming. I saw the car come towards us, and it was very quick. Everything was very quick." He told the hearing he frantically searched for his girlfriend, but couldn't find her. He only found her phone and glasses in a pool of blood. Andrea had been flung into the Thames. She died from her injuries 2 weeks after the attack.
Well, Hugh, we also heard evidence from a man called Michael Brown. He had been driving his van along Westminster Bridge at the time of the attack. He told the court he saw Andrea Christia being thrown around 10 feet into the air before falling straight down into the River Thames. He then said he called 999. He tried to look for her in the river. At first he couldn't see her, and then he spotted her body floating in the river. And at the end of his evidence, Hugh, the barrister representing the families of the inquest said to him that they wanted to thank him for his efforts to try and help her. And at that point, Mr. Brown, in the witness box, broke down in tears. The hearing here continues tomorrow.
Many thanks, Helena, for the latest on the inquest at the Old Bailey. Helena Lee, unfortunately. times 552.
The inquest into the deaths of 5 people killed in the Westminster terror attack last year is continuing at the Old Bailey. Today focuses on the death of PC Keith Palmer. Our correspondent Helena Lee is outside the court and we can join her now. Helena.
Well, Martin, we've heard this morning in court distressing audio recordings of those who tried to help PC Palmer as he was lying and dying on the ground after he was attacked by Khalid Masood. And in one of those recordings, a person can be heard saying that he had, describing him as having a weak pulse and losing blood. Another can be heard urging PC Palmer to fight for his life. The court was shown this photograph of PC Palmer at the start of the inquest this morning, taken by an American tourist outside the Palace of Westminster. It was to be the last photograph of him. He was killed not long after. This is the aftermath of the attack. PC Palmer had been on duty and unarmed when Khalid Masood approached him. There was a struggle. Masood then stabbed him. Witnesses today have been describing what they saw. One eyewitness, whose statement was read to court, said as soon as the knife went up, it went from car accident to attack. Antonia Kerridge, a parliamentary assistant, was in a building opposite the palace. She told the court the policeman had collapsed. The attacker ran over to him and just leant down towards him and raised the knife quite high, and he just stabbed him 2 or 3 or 4 times. I was looking away. It was more than once. He raised the knife up. Masood was then shot dead by officers. Emergency services tried to treat PC Keith Palmer at the scene, but he died from his injuries. An officer dedicated to his job, a father of a young daughter and a husband. The man, Martin, who the inquest heard was the public face of Parliament. The hearing here is continuing this afternoon.
Helena, thank you very much. Helena Lee at the Old Bailey. The funerals have been almost wild. Now, the inquest is caused by the Westminster Bridge terrorist attack has been told about attempts to save the life of PC Keith Palmer. The court has been shown CCTV footage of the moment PC Palmer was stabbed by Khalid Masood while he was on duty outside the Palace of Westminster. Our correspondent Helena Lee is following these inquests. Helena.
Well, Jane, the court was taken back to that horrific day last March last year. Harrowing footage was shown of the moment that PC Keith Palmer was attacked, and then audio was played of those who were trying to save him, the desperate voices of those who were trying to care for PC Palmer as he was laying dying on the floor, filled Court 1 here at the Old Bailey. And in one recording, you could hear a man urging him to fight for his life. The court was shown this photograph of PC Palmer at the start of the inquest this morning, taken by an American tourist outside the Palace of Westminster. It was to be the last photograph of him. He was killed not long after. This is the aftermath of the attack. PC Palmer had been on duty and unarmed when Khalid Masood approached him. There was a struggle. Masood then stabbed him. Witnesses today have been describing what they saw. One eyewitness, whose statement was read to court, said as soon as the knives went up, it went from car accident to attack. Antonia Kerridge, a parliamentary assistant, was in a building opposite the palace. She told the court the policeman had collapsed. The attacker ran over to him and just leant down towards him and raised the knife quite high, and he just stabbed him 2 or 3 or 4 times. I was looking away. It was more than once. He raised the knife up. James West, another witness, had been attending an event nearby. He saw PC Palmer being repeatedly stabbed. The attack was like you see in a horror film, he told the court. Police officers who were at the scene also came to court today. PC James Ross was on duty and saw what happened. Asked about the security arrangements at the gates where PC Palmer was attacked,
Mr. Ross said it was above my pay grade. The coroner thanked him at the end of his evidence, saying it can't have been easy to relive the events. After the attack, Masood was shot dead by officers. Emergency services tried to treat PC Palmer at the scene, but he died from his injuries. An officer dedicated to his job, a father of a young daughter and a husband. The inquests are expected to last up to 5 weeks.
Well, Jane, the court also said that there were no firearms officers outside where PC Keith Palmer was on duty, and one officer who was near the scene at the time came to court today to give evidence, PC Doug Blaze, and he was asked in court if a chance to save PC Palmer's life had been lost because no firearms officers were present. He replied to the court, certainly, had firearms officers been there, the threat maybe could have been neutralised quicker. The evidence has finished for the day here at the Old Bailey. The hearing continues at 10:15 on Monday.
Eleanor, thank you. Helen Lee there at the Old Bailey.
Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, due on Thursday, should be delayed. Allegations of sexual misconduct should be investigated. Christine Ford, his nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, pinned her to a bed and tried to remove her clothing when they were teenagers. He denies the claim. The MP, Tobias Ellwood, has told the inquest into the deaths of the Westminster Bridge attack that he ignored his fears of a secondary attack as he tried to help resuscitate one of the victims. Mr. Ellwood said his main concern had been helping PC Keith Palmer, who had been stabbed. Well, Helen Lee is at the Old Bailey for us, and some very emotional testimony today.
Yes, Simon, Tobias Ellwood came to court here. He stood in the witness box for nearly an hour. He, at one point, held back tears as he recalled the events of that day last March. He began by describing to court how he heard people screaming in shock. He remembered seeing the panic in people's eyes, he said, and then he went on to tell the court how he went to help PC Palmer as he lay dying on the ground.
Tobias Ellwood came to court today and described how he ignored fears of a second terror attack as he tried to help save PC Palmer. He told the inquest how he saw 2 bodies on the ground. The officer was one of them. He went to help, medically trained from a previous army career. He described to the court how he started CPR on PC Palmer. An emergency medical team then arrived and operated on the officer. As he described what happened next, Mr. Ellwood said, "Forgive me, it's sometimes easier to do the helping than to talk about it afterwards." The court heard how nothing more could be done for PC Palmer. When the doctor told Mr. Ellwood he could stop helping, he told the inquest, "That's when I said, 'Sir, you're going to have to tell me to stop, to order me to stop.'" Mr. Ellwood then said this at the end, "We both tidied up the body as best we could. I closed his eyes and I said, 'I'm sorry.'" He went on to say it was a very silent end, being left completely alone in an eerily silent palace of Westminster. The coroner thanked Mr. Ellwood for all his efforts to try and save PC Palmer.
Well, at the moment in court, Simon, evidence has been heard from the doctor who led the medical team who tried to save PC Palmer. That doctor is giving evidence to the court at the moment. We're expecting later on this afternoon to hear from 2 armed officers. They were on duty at the time on the day of the attack. Simon.
Helen Lee at the Old Bailey, thank you very much.
The really attack, that he ignored his fears of a secondary attack, has said his main concern had been helping PC Keith Palmer, who'd been stabbed. As Helen Lee now reports.
Tobias Ellwood came to court today and described how he ignored fears of a second terror attack as he tried to help save PC Palmer. He told the inquest how he saw 2 bodies on the ground. The officer was one of them. He went to help, medically trained from a previous army career. He described to the court how he started CPR on PC Palmer. An emergency medical team then arrived and operated on the officer. As he described what happened next, Mr. Ellwood said, "Forgive me, it's sometimes easier to do the helping than to talk about it afterwards." The court heard how nothing more could be done for PC Palmer. When the doctor told Mr. Elwood he could stop helping, he told the inquest, "That's when I said, 'Sir, you're going to have to tell me to stop, to order me to stop.'" Mr. Elwood then said this at the end, "We both tidied up the body as best we could. I closed his eyes and I said, 'I'm sorry.'" He went on to describe how he was left alone with PC Palmer's body in an eerily silent palace of Westminster. The coroner thanked Mr. Elwood for all his efforts to try and save PC Palmer. Eleanor Lee, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
Let's go live to the Old Bailey now. Our correspondent Jenny Kumar is there. What else has emerged, particularly during the afternoon, Jenny, today?
Well, this afternoon it emerged that there were no armed officers near carriage gates for 45 minutes before the attacks, and that the two officers on patrol when the car crashed near Parliament remained in an area called the Colonnade, an arched area in the corner of New Palace Yard, and there's CCTV footage showing them moving towards PC Palmer and Khalid Massoud after they heard 3 shots. The court also heard that the gates opened when the Assistant Met Commissioner was leaving, his vehicle was leaving, and that was when Khalid Massoud drove in. And it also emerged that the officers on duty that day were unaware of guidelines which said that they should be near the gates when they were open. I also heard that there was a misconduct process against PC Ashby, one of the men on duty, one of the armed officers on duty that day, but no formal action was taken. But it did find that they should have been, the 2 officers should have been near the gates when they were open.
Okay, Jenny, thank you very much indeed for that. Jenny Kumar there outside the Old Bailey.
Is it coming tomorrow?
The Grenfell inquiry has been hearing Muldaur acted at home for a period of years. Dominic Adamson, representing Michelle Palmer, was questioning PC Lee Ashby, one of 2 firearms officers on duty during the terror attack of March last year. Let's get more from our correspondent Jenny Kumar, who's following the inquest at the Old Bailey. Jenny, what was said today?
Well, today we had more evidence from PC Lee Ashby, who had described how he was in a part of New Palace Yard away from the gates when the attack happened. And he explained that he had received daily instruction to patrol the area according to a map, but that he was unaware of guidelines that had come in 2015, which stipulated that armed officers should be near the gates when they were open. And he indicated that his fellow PCs were also aware of these guidelines, and that even some of his superiors were. And the court was shown some emails from Nick Aldworth raising concerns that officers, Nick Aldworth, who is the Chief Inspector of Parliament, and he was raising concerns in the emails that officers weren't following instructions and that they weren't positioning themselves in the right areas. And these emails dated back as early as February 2015. Now, the lawyer for PC Palmer suggested it was an extraordinary situation where armed officers had no idea what they were supposed to be doing, and that lax security arrangements had persisted for years. And in response, PC Ashby, who was on duty that day, said that the area around the front of Parliament, known as Sector 3, was too big, too large for 2 officers, and he thought there should have been 4 sets of armed officers at fixed points on the gate. And he said that he would have fired at the attacker if he was at a fixed post and had a clear shot. Now, tomorrow we expect to hear from PC Sanders, who was the other armed officer, and there may also be details about the attacker, Khalid Massoud.
Jenny, many thanks for the update again. Jenny Kumar with the latest there, the inquest at the Old Bailey.
It's alright.
27 minutes past 5, 2 SAS.
The inquest into the Westminster terror attack has heard details of the attacker's life. Khalid Massoud's mother feared he would kill someone while he was still a teenager. His failed relationships, violent criminal past, and conversion to Islam during his spell in prison were also discussed. Let's go to your home now. Our reporter Jenny Kumar is there. Jenny.
heard details of the life of Khalid Massoud, who killed 4 people on Westminster Bridge when he was driving Parliament with them, and later went on to stab PC Palmer after entering Parliament through the gates. And today we heard from DCI Brown, a counter-terror investigator, about his life. So he was born in South London, moved to Tunbridge Wells as a teenager, and his first criminal offence occurred at 14. It was a shoplifting offence, but as he got older he became increasingly violent. And the old baby heard that Massoud's mother told police he would go out to pubs and clubs looking for a fight as an older teenager. And she also described him as an angry person, and she was worried he would kill someone through fighting. Now, during the 80s, he was involved in a number of violent incidents, many of them involving alcohol. And in May 2003, he stabbed Daniel Smith through the nose. The blade went through the palate of his mouth into his jaw with such force that the blade fell off. Now, later, Khalid Massoud attributed his acquittal from this attack and also the survival of his daughter from a serious car incident to his Islamic faith. He described it as one of 2 miracles which proved the truth of Islam. And we heard that Massoud converted to Islam during the first of 2 spells in prison, where he started to read the Quran. We also heard that he later went on to study for an economics degree at university in Brighton. He got 2-1, but he couldn't get a job, so ended up working as a cleaner. And we heard that his mother said that he visited her shortly before the incident on the 22nd of March, shortly before that attack. He visited her on the 17th of March, and he said to her, "Don't say I'm a terrorist, I am not."
Jenny Kumar at the Old Bailey, thank you very much. If you want to know anything about these are our headlines.
Now, first into the Westminster Bridge attack has heard how Khalid Massoud told his children he was going to die fighting for God. 52-year-old was shot dead after driving into pedestrians on the bridge and fatally stabbing a police officer. 5 people were killed in the attack in March of 2017. And today, CCTV images of his final movements before the attack were made public for the first time, as Daniel Sanford reports from the Old Bailey.
Khalid Massoud on the night before his attack on Westminster Bridge, buying his last evening meal at a fish and chip shop in Brighton. He'd been known as a violent man in his 20s and 30s and been arrested for shoplifting at just 14, but he'd been more settled since converting to Islam in prison. That was about to end. His first preparations had been in a Birmingham Tesco's 13 days before the attack. Here he bought the 2 large Sabatier carving knives with which he stabbed PC Keith Palmer to death. A week later, at Enterprise Car Hire, he rented his other weapon, the Hyundai 4x4, which he used to kill 4 pedestrians on the bridge.
The inquest heard that in the months before the attack, Khalid Massoud had told his youngest children, "I'm going to die fighting for God." 5 days before, he'd gone to Wales to see his mother, and as he left, he looked over his shoulder and said, "They will say I'm a terrorist. I'm not."
The next day, he did what police believe was a reconnaissance trip over Westminster Bridge, driving in the roadway where 4 days later he would drive up the pavement, hitting tourists at speed. He spent the next 4 nights at hotels in Brighton and here at Cobham Services on the M25, laughing and joking with the receptionist, but watching videos by so-called Islamic State in his room. On the morning of the attack, he did a second reconnaissance run on the bridge. The attack itself that afternoon took 82 seconds. He killed 2 Londoners, 2 tourists, and a police officer who was guarding the House of Commons. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Old Bailey.
2 people have died after Storm Alley swept across.
Now, an inquest has been told that the Westminster Bridge attacker, Khalid Massoud, attended the same mosque as extremists convicted of plotting a series of bomb attacks after he converted to Islam in jail. Massoud was shot dead after driving into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge and fatally stabbing a police officer. Well, our correspondent Jenny Kumar is at the Old Bailey. Jenny, what more did the inquest hear today?
Well, this afternoon we've been hearing evidence from Khalid Massoud's mother, and she described the final moments she spent with her son. She explained how this is her 6 days before the attack on the 16th of March. They were preparing a meal, and he asked her to repeat certain religious phrases, one of which was, "Allah is the one true God, and Muhammad is his prophet." And she said she repeated these phrases. She herself wasn't a religious person, she had no religion, but she said she liked to lead a decent life. But she was aware that her son was a devout Muslim to the phrases. And the following morning, he again asked her to repeat those phrases. Again, she did so. But his final words to her, as they were going their separate ways the following morning, were, "They will say I'm a terrorist, I am not." And she explained that at the time she was confused by the phrase, she didn't know what he meant, but she had no idea about what he was planning. And she was asked whether she thought she should call the police, but she said that she thought his violent past was behind him, so it didn't occur to her. And she said that she learnt of the attack on the 10 o'clock news. She said as soon as she saw the body, she knew it was him, and she said it all made sense to her, what he had said. And during her evidence, it became clear that there were difficult moments during their relationship. She said that he was an angry person, a fiery person, but there was only one time that he had shown anger to her, and it was over a chicken dinner. She said that he switched like the Incredible Hulk. And the inquest was shown some emails that showed the difficulties in their relationship. But she said, ending her evidence, that she was sorry to the families, the victims. And we also heard evidence from his partner at the time. She said that she had no idea that she was married to someone so evil, and she said she wished she had been more vigilant.
Okay, Jenny, thank you for that. Jenny Kumar there at the Old Bailey. Now let's take a
Inquiry has begun into the contaminated blood scandal, in which 2,500 NHS patients. Very much Sophie Hutchinson at Church House. Well, the inquest into the deaths of the Westminster terror attack in March last year had continued this morning. Khalid Massoud was shot dead by police after fatally stabbing PC Chief Palmer and firing into and killing 4 pedestrians on Westminster Bridge. Our news correspondent Jenny Kumar has been in court at the Old Bailey, and we can join her now. What has the hearing been focusing on today, Jenny?
Well, today, Commander Usher has been giving evidence. He is head of policing at the Palace of Westminster, and he's been questioning some of the evidence that some of his own armed officers gave to the inquest last week. He said he found some of it difficult to reconcile. He said he found some of it slightly odd. The 2 armed officers, PC Ashby, PC Sanders, were in a part of New Palace Yard where they couldn't see what was happening when the attack happened, when they were on duty. And they told the inquest that they were unaware of security guidelines which said they should be near the front gates when they were open. And they said that they took daily instruction to patrol the yard according to a map on the wall. Now, Commander Usher explained that after the attack he had a meeting with the 2 officers, and that PC Ashby brought along the map to this meeting, and Commander Usher said that he felt that perhaps PC Ashby had done this because he was perhaps potentially aware that they hadn't got the patrolling right. He also said he found it slightly odd that the officers had told the inquest that they took daily instruction as to where to patrol and use the map every day, because it was a small rectangular area surrounded by a building, and he said he didn't understand why there was a need for daily reference. Also today, Commander Usher has been cross-examined, and the lawyer representing the widow of PC Palmer, the unarmed officer who was fatally stabbed, he asked the commander whether no stone had been left unturned in the post-attack review, and the commander answered that it's his understanding that yes, no stone had been left unturned. But then he was asked how many statements were taken from officers other than PC's Ashby and Sanders about protection in New Palace Yard, and he said none. This afternoon, the inquest continues, and more detail about the security arrangements at Parliament is due to be heard.
Jenny, thank you very much. Jenny Kumar at the Old Bailey. You're watching Afternoon Live, please.
Khalid Masood was shot dead by police after fatally stabbing PC Palmer, crashing.
There was a security round the front of from the two armed officers who were on duty, PC Ashby and PC Sanders, and they told the inquest that they were unaware of guidelines which said that they should be near the front gates of Parliament when they were open. They told the inquest that they followed a map, they patrolled an area detailed in a map that was posted on the wall, and they took daily instruction to do so. And they told the inquest that they and their colleagues did this, and that also some of their superiors were also unaware of these new updated guidelines that came in a few years ago. Today, the head of policing at Westminster, Commander Usher, told the inquest that he found some of their evidence slightly odd, and he said, as far as he was aware, the majority of armed officers were complying with instructions. But today, Commander Usher faced sustained questioning about the suitability of security at Westminster. The lawyer for PC Palmer's family put it to him that the attitude of the Metropolitan Police has been to pass the buck and assert that responsibility for the non-compliance with instructions rests solely with PC Ashby and PC Sanders, those armed officers who were on duty that day. And he said that PC Palmer was standing at the gates with baton and spray when he was confronted with a terrorist armed with two knives. That which was entirely predictable occurred. And he continued saying that the Metropolitan Police failed to have the necessary arrangements in place. Now, in response, Commander Usher disagreed with this, and he denied that the Metropolitan Police had failed to protect PC Palmer. And he said that he felt that even if the officers were complying with instructions, even if they were at the front of Parliament, they would have done what they did on the day, which was to move towards the perimeter fence where Khalid Masood had crashed his car. Now, the inquest continues, and tomorrow the Chief Inspector of Operations at Westminster is expected to give evidence.
Jenny, thanks very much indeed for the latest at the Old Bailey and the inquest taking place there.
Westminster attacker Khalid Masood has told an inquest he had no doubt Masood was planning to kill police. Khalid Masood drove his car into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge in March last year before fatally stabbing PC Keith Palmer outside the Houses of Parliament. 5 people were killed in total and 50 wounded. Our correspondent Helena Lee is following the inquest at the Old Bailey. Helena, tell us more about today's testimony.
Well, this is the first time we've heard from PC Nick Carlisle. He was on duty with PC Palmer on the day of the attack. Now, they were on duty outside the gates. He came to court today to describe how he first heard a loud bang. He thought it was a road traffic accident at first. Then he looked over. He saw Khalid Masood's 4x4 vehicle crashed into the railings. He then saw smoke coming through the fence. That was about 30 metres away from where he was standing. And then he said next he saw and heard people screaming and running towards Parliament Square. And then he said to the court he saw a man in a suit who was shouting, "Men with knives stabbing people, men with knives." Now, PC Carlisle then said he backed away. He then saw PC Palmer, his colleague, had been caught by Khalid Masood, and he told the court, "I ran forward intending to issue a rugby tackle. He came at me with knives." Now, the court then heard that police officers shot Khalid Masood. He then went over to handcuff him because he feared that he could have been wearing a suicide vest. And then he was asked in court Did you have any doubts that Khalid Massoud, what his intentions were? And PC Carlisle said to the court, none whatsoever. He looked at me directly in the eye. He was coming through a crowd of people. He wasn't interested in members of the public. He was coming to kill police officers. At the end of his evidence, the barrister who was representing PC Palmer's family thanked him for his bravery, for his help on the day of the attack. And Martin, the evidence now has
The coroner at the inquest into the Westminster Bridge attack has begun delivering his conclusions, starting with a tribute to the great dignity of the victims' families. Judge Mark Lucraft, QC, said one of the most iconic areas of London was the site of the deliberate act of terrorism on the 22nd of March last year. He described Khalid Massoud's attack in a rented car, saying throughout its passage across the bridge, on the roadway, on the pavement, in the cycle lane, and moving between those places, it was driven with a clear, murderous intent. Our correspondent Richard Lister is following those inquests, and we can join him now. Richard, tell us more about what the coroner's been saying.
Yes, Judge Mark Lucraft, QC, has really just started off this process, which we expect to take about 3 hours or so. He's about an hour into delivering his conclusions, and he's starting off by summarising the evidence that was heard over the 3 weeks or so of this inquest. But he began, as you say, by delivering a tribute to the victims' families and setting up the scene a little bit about what happened on the 22nd of March last year. He said that was a life-changing day for many when one of the most iconic areas of London was the target of a deliberate attack. An attack which he said lasted just 82 seconds, but with terrible consequences for so many people. He said Khalid Massoud had driven his vehicle with clear, murderous intent, and he said that some 29 people, apart from those people who received fatal injuries on the bridge, 29 others had also been seriously injured by his car as he drove it across Westminster Bridge before crashing it into the railings around the Palace of Westminster, running through the front gates and then killing PC Keith Palmer with knives. That more people did not die, said the judge, was due to the overwhelming actions of those who responded, both professionals and members of the public. But there was some criticism too. He said, very pointedly, sadly, some members of the public chose to photograph and film rather than help. And he said some of the material that's been posted online has been very distressing to the families, and he asked for it to be removed. He praised the families of those killed, the 5 people killed, saying they've shown great dignity throughout this inquest process. And as I say, he's expected to speak for another couple of hours before delivering his findings.
And what will the families be listening out for, particularly?
I think, Martine, there are really 3 areas that they're most interested in. They will want to know whether he's come to any conclusions about the level of security, both around the Palace of Westminster and on Westminster Bridge. Of course, what would be regarded as very high-value targets by any potential terrorist, and yet there were not bars or obstacles in place on the bridge, and armed officers who were in place within the confines of the Palace of Westminster were not situated at that time right by the gates where Khalid Massoud made his entry into the confines of the Palace of Westminster. So families will want to know whether the coroner believes that more should have been done and could have been done before that attack to minimise the loss of life. They will also want to know whether he has any views on whether the security services should have played a more active role. Khalid Massoud was known to them, but he wasn't an active subject of interest. And of course some will be saying maybe he should have been, maybe something more could have been done to prevent this attack.
Richard, thank you very much. Richard Lister there.
Maybe tomorrow.
The first survivor of the Grenfell Tower fire to give evidence at the inquiry has been describing the moment he tried to leave his 10th floor flat on The coroner at the inquest into the Westminster Bridge attack has begun delivering his conclusions, starting with a tribute to the great dignity of the victims' family. Judge Mark Lucraft, QC, said one of the most iconic areas of London was the site of a deliberate act of terrorism on the 22nd of March last year. He described Khalid Massoud's attack in a rented car, saying throughout its passage across the bridge, on the roadway, on the pavement, in the cycle lane, and moving between those places, it was driven with a clear, murderous intent. Our correspondent Richard Lister is following those inquests, and we can join him now. Richard, tell us more about what the coroner's been saying.
Yes, Judge Mark Lucraft QC has really just started off this process, which we expect to take about 3 hours or so. He's about an hour into delivering his conclusions, and he's starting off by summarising the evidence that was heard over the 3 weeks or so of this inquest. But he began, as you say, by delivering a tribute to the victims' families and setting up the scene a little bit about what happened on the 22nd of March last year. He said that was a life-changing day for many when one of the most iconic areas of London was the target of a deliberate attack. An attack which he said lasted just 82 seconds, but with terrible consequences for so many people. He said Khalid Massoud had driven his vehicle with clear, murderous intent, and he said that some 29 people, apart from those people who received fatal injuries on the bridge, 29 others had also been seriously injured by his car as he drove it across Westminster Bridge before crashing it into the railings around the Palace of Westminster, running through the front gates and then killing PC Keith Palmer with knives. That more people did not die, said the judge, was due to the overwhelming actions of those who responded, both professionals and members of the public. But there was some criticism too. He said, very pointedly, sadly, some members of the public chose to photograph and film rather than help. And he said some of the material that's been posted online has been very distressing for the families, and he asked for it to be removed. He praised the families of those killed, the 5 people killed, saying they've shown great dignity throughout this inquest process. And as I say, he's expected to speak for another couple of hours before delivering his findings.
And what will the families be listening out for, particularly?
I think, Martine, there are really 3 areas that they're most interested in. They will want to know whether he's come to any conclusions about the level of security, both around the Palace of Westminster and on Westminster Bridge. Of course, what would be regarded as very high-value targets by any potential terrorist, and yet there were not bollards or obstacles in place on the bridge, and armed officers who were in place within the confines of the Palace of Westminster were not situated at that time right by the gates where Khalid Massoud made his entry into the confines of the Palace of Westminster. So families will want to know whether the coroner believes that more should have been done and could have been done before that attack to minimise the loss of life. They will also want to know whether he has any views on whether the security services should have played a more active role. Khalid Massoud was known to them, but he wasn't an active subject of interest. And of course some will be saying maybe he should have been, maybe something more could have been done to prevent this attack.
Richard, thank you very much. Richard Lister there.
Maybe tomorrow.
The first survivor of the Grenfell Tower fire to give evidence at the inquiry has been describing the moment he tried to leave his 10th floor flat.
Metropolitan Police has apologised after the coroner at the inquest into the Westminster Bridge attacks concluded that the murder of an unarmed officer outside Parliament could have been prevented. The coroner said that if there had been armed officers present, then they could have stopped Massoud from stabbing PC Keith Palmer. 4 people died when Massoud ran over pedestrians on Westminster Bridge in March of last year before going on to attack PC Palmer. From the Old Bailey, our correspondent, Daniel Tucker reports.
The last calm moments of what had been just another Westminster day. American tourist Kurt Cochran with his wife Melissa, pensioner Leslie Rhodes returning from hospital, Aisha Frey texting her husband on her way to pick up her kids from school, Andrea Cristea, a tourist from Romania, and PC Keith Palmer guarding the main gate of Parliament. But in 82 seconds of terror, they were all left with fatal injuries. The shocking deaths produced searching questions, not least about armed policing at Parliament. PC Keith Palmer's widow asked how he was left alone and unarmed at the open gate to one of the country's top terrorist targets. where he heroically challenged Khalid Massoud, who was wielding 2 knives. His attacker had to be shot dead by a ministerial bodyguard. The armed officers who should have been at the gate were some 50 metres away. With PC Palmer's family listening in, the Chief Coroner, Mark Lucraft QC, said today, due to shortcomings in the security system, the armed officers were not aware of a requirement to remain in close proximity to the gates. Had they been stationed there, it's possible that they may have been able to prevent PC Palmer suffering fatal injuries. That devastating finding prompted this immediate apology.
Even the possibility that the Met lost the chance to prevent the murder of such a brave and courageous officer is unacceptable. For the loss of that possibility to protect him from Khalid Massoud, we are deeply sorry.
PC Palmer's sister and mother have accused senior officers of closing ranks. There was also a lack of protection for pedestrians on the bridge. Massoud used a rented 4x4 to run people down, first striking Kurt Cochran, whose wife Melissa survived because he pushed her out of the way.
And knowing that he saved me, sure makes me want to make him proud and recover as best I can and just go on and do what I can for my family and myself.
The bereaved families think attacks on pedestrians in Nice and Berlin the previous year should have led to barriers on Westminster Bridge. The last big issue was what MI5 already knew about Massoud.
A senior MI5 official told the coroner that over the years, Khalid Massoud had been linked to an Al-Qaeda bomber and members of the banned group Al-Muhajirun, and in 2010 had been listed as a known extremist and an official subject of interest before dropping off the radar.
His murder of Aisha Frey left 2 daughters without a mother, and her husband told me he felt MI5 had failed to protect her.
The one thing I absolutely want to do is to ensure that no other family goes through the horrendous pain that myself and my family have gone through.
A pain also felt by PC Palmer's widow, who said his force had left him in a vulnerable location with no protection to die. Daniel Sanford, BBC News.
Technology has delivered all of its problems.
Hold on, guys. Take.
One of Britain's most senior
Sorry.
are underway. The victims won't be officially named until all of their families have been informed. Sophie Long, BBC News.
One of Britain's most senior police officers has told the inquests into the Westminster Bridge attack how he stayed in his car as PC Keith Palmer was stabbed to death because he had no protective equipment. So Craig Mackey, who was a acting chief of the Metropolitan Police at the time, told the hearing he was at Westminster for a meeting where he saw the unarmed constable being attacked. Helen Marie is at the Old Bailey now with the very latest. Helen.
Well, Rebecca, this is the first time that we've heard from Sir Craig Mackey, who, as you mentioned there, was the acting commissioner of the Metropolitan Police at the time. By chance, had ended up in New Palace Yard and witnessed the attack for himself. Now, he came to the inquest here today. He told the jury he had been in a meeting in the House of Commons. He then came out of that meeting, got into the passenger seat of the car. His driver was sitting next to him, and a colleague was in the back of the car. They then moved round in the car towards the gates. That's the gates where PC Palmer was on duty in order to leave. But it was at that point, he told the inquest, he heard a very, very loud bang. He saw people running in all directions, and then he told the inquest he saw a large male coming forward with a knife. It looked like one of those out of a carving block, he told the jury. He then couldn't work out whether that man was connected to the bang that he heard, and then at that point he said because they had no protection in the car, they didn't have a radio, they decided to lock the car. They sat in that car and they witnessed PC Palmer being stabbed by Khalid Masood. And Sir Craig told the inquest today it was two absolutely determined stab wounds. He then said the attacker ran very close past the driver's side of the car they were in, and at that point he then heard those shots. Khalid Masood was shot by close protection officers. He told the inquest as well it was his instinct at first to get out of the car and go and help the officers who were dealing with the situation, but there was a police officer close by who told them that they had to leave the scene. Now the inquest here, evidence has finished for today. It will resume on Wednesday, 11:30, when we're expecting to hear from those two close protection officers, one of whom shot Khalid Masood dead.
Helena, thank you. Helena Lee there, our correspondent at the Old Bailey. The Grenfell inquiry continues today. Here is
Hello everyone, this is Afternoon Live and I'm Edward. The minister's bodyguard who shot and killed the Westminster attacker, Khalid Masood, has been describing events leading up to the moment that he opened fire. The close protection officer, known only by his call sign SA74, told the inquest into the death that day how Masood was coming towards him with two large knives covered in blood. He said he thought Masood was going to kill him, and he fired 3 shots from his long pistol. Our correspondent Helen Lee has been listening to the evidence in court. Helen.
In court were visible only to the jury, the barristers and the coroner. They were out of sight from the public gallery and also the media. But what they described in the public gallery and also the media, but what they described in court was that on that day they were in New Palace Yard. That's the area between the gates where PCP Palmer was standing and the members' entrance. They were waiting for a minister to come out, and at that point they heard a very loud explosion. They then saw and heard people screaming and uniformed officers running towards them into New Palace Yard, and the officer, the coast protection officer who ended up shooting Khalid Masood, said they were frantically moving towards me, trying to get away from something or someone. Then they saw Khalid Masood with 2 knives in his hand, and that officer then went on to tell the court he was carrying 2 large knives, and I could see that they were covered in blood. And at times during his evidence, he had to pause at one point because he was upset and his voice was shaking. He then went on to tell the court how Khalid Masood then continuing towards these 2 close protection officers. He didn't stop. The officers then shouted at him to drop his knives. He didn't. He continued. And at that point, the bodyguard fired at Masood twice. And the barrister in court asked the bodyguard, what did you think he was going to do? And the bodyguard replied, he was going to kill me. We then heard how both the bodyguards assisted in first aid, in resuscitation on Khalid Masood, and then they have now finished giving evidence here in court this afternoon. We'll hear more evidence from others who helped with that resuscitation and first aid on the attacker, and the timetable for the rest of the week. The jury expected to go out on Friday when they will consider deliberations.
Helena, thank you very much indeed. Helena Lee reports.
Taking you now to the Old Bailey police station.
Terrorists drove a hired car across Westminster Bridge, deliberately driving into pedestrians before crashing the vehicle into the perimeter wall of the Palace of Westminster. Armed with 2 knives, he then ran through carriage gates. the vehicle entrance to the palace and fatally stabbed Police Constable Pete Palmer, an unarmed officer who was on duty to protect the Parliament. The whole attack, from when he drove onto Westminster Bridge to being shot by armed officers, lasted just 82 seconds, but has had the most appalling consequences. I would like to once again express my condolences to all the families and loved ones of his victims. To all the families and loved ones of his victims. Kurt Cochran, Leslie Rhodes, Aisha Braid, Andrea Christier, and Police Constable Pete Palmer. The two armed close protection officers who confronted this individual acted with great courage. They undoubtedly prevented others from being injured and further loss of life. I pay tribute to their tremendous professionalism and their bravery. It will be hard to forget the heartbreaking testimony of the officer who shot this terrorist. A stark reminder that our officers are human and the distress that taking another person's life causes them, even if that individual is a terrorist, even if there is no alternative. We also have a testimony from Police Constable Nick Carlisle, a colleague of PC Park, who attempted to tackle the armed terrorist, which allowed his fellow officer to get up and away from his attacker. Just moments later, PC Carlisle then handcuffed the attacker after he was shot, fearing he may be wearing a suicide vest. PC Carlisle did this with the aim of protecting his fellow officers and the public from further harm, whilst giving no regard to his own safety. His actions are in keeping with the finest traditions of the Metropolitan Police Service, and are yet another example of the outstanding courage and professionalism demonstrated on a daily basis by police officers up and down this country. On behalf of the Met, I would like to again pay tribute to Police Constable Pete Palmer, a dedicated, well-known, respected and courageous officer. PC Palmer was posthumously awarded the George Medal for Gallantry, having died a hero as he bravely confronted an armed terrorist while on duty protecting the country. I know I speak on behalf of colleagues from across the Met in expressing our deepest sympathy to PC Palmer's family and the families and loved ones of all the victims of this difficult time. Our thoughts are also with the survivors, including some of our own officers who were seriously injured in this attack. I would like to once again thank the Chief Coroner and the jury for their full and rigorous examination of the facts. In relation to Police Constable Palmer's death, the Chief Coroner identified shortcomings in the security system at the Palace of Westminster, including the supervision of those engaged in those duties. We unreservedly accept this conclusion. And as I said at the conclusion of the first part of the inquest, which examined the deaths of the victims, even the possibility that the Metropolitan Police Service lost the chance to prevent the murder of one of our officers is unacceptable, and we are deeply sorry. Security arrangements have substantially changed since the attack, and we will do everything that is possible to improve that position further. We now await the Chief Coroner's detailed conclusions as to the reason Article 2 is engaged in relation to PC Palmer's death, and we will consider those in full. His Honour Judge Mark Luca, QC, also paid tribute to Detective Superintendent John Croxton of SA15 in New Scotland Yard, and his team of detectives from the Met Counter-Terrorism Command, for the work in identifying whether there was any further threat last year to the UK, and for collecting all the evidence on behalf of the coroner. Lastly, can I turn to some of the abhorrent remarks circulating about Deputy Commissioner Sir Craig Mackey? I have the advantage of overseeing this inquiry, and both I and the investigators know there is nothing that Craig could have done to have stopped Masood, or to have saved PC Palmer, or any others from being injured. Craig was in a car accompanied by two civilian staff members. Neither he nor the two civilian staff had any protective equipment with them. The inquest heard that his initial reaction as a police officer was to get out of the vehicle, but he was told not to do so by a uniformed officer at the scene. Had he done so, it would have put Craig directly in the line of fire and prevented the protection officer from taking the shot, which stopped the terrorist once and for all. Let me quote the words of the Chief Coroner, the person I know read, listened and watched every piece of evidence in this case. He said this: what Sir Craig did was sensible and proper, and was intended to protect others in the car with them. None of them had any means of protecting himself or resisting an attack. Even if he had got out of the car, it is clear from the CCTV evidence that he would not have reached PC Park before Masood had inflicted the fatal wound. Indeed, it is very likely that Masood would have been past the car, even if Sir Craig had got out of it. It is also clear that after Masood had been shot, Sir Craig did not flee the scene. His first instinct was to get out in New Palace Yard, as we saw on the footage when he opened the car door. However, he was told by an officer to leave, and for good reason. You may well think it was important for the most senior police officer in the country to be at New Scotland Yard, where he could take command and control of what at that time could potentially have been a much larger attack. Everyone involved in the terrible events that day have been left living with the painful legacy of one man's murderous actions. We must all remember who was responsible for this attack, a terrorist, and not give such people the comfort that they somehow divided us as a result of their actions. We must all stand together and remember that it is only in standing together as a nation that will defeat the greatest evil of our times. At the centre of this are the victims and those injured, as well as their loved ones. They remain our most important consideration, and today will no doubt be another very difficult day for them. Thank you for listening. I will take a couple of questions. It didn't reveal that there were flaws in the security, and evidence was heard to that effect. So there has been a long-running series of reviews about security of the Palace of Westminster. They have continued. We did not wait for this inquest. When Keith was murdered, we have immediately gone to look at what we could do to improve security, and we're waiting for some of those detailed conclusions from the coroner, and we will look at that and we will improve the situation further alongside Parliament. Parliament called in Sir John Murphy, who did a very rigorous review. Sir John has come back to look at what we've done. He's impressed with what we've done so far. There is more to do, and we will do. Thank you very much.
Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu from Metropolitan Police are making a statement outside the Old Bailey after a short time ago the jury returned a verdict of lawful killing in the inquest into the death of the Westminster Bridge attacker Khalid Masood. You will recall that 4 people were killed when he mowed them down in March last year. 29 people injured and then returned to staff fatally. PC Keith Palmer. Neil Basu is there paying tribute to those who died and also the survivors of the attack, including some of his own officers. He said, though, that those who took the officer who took the fatal shot was distressed, but officers always feel distressed at the taking of a life, even if it is that of a terrorist. And he also went on to defend Sir Craig Mackey, one of the senior police officer who stayed in his car during that attack, pointing out that his intention was to get out of the car, but was told not to, and had he done so, would have been in the way of the chief of the Coast Protection Officer who took the shot that killed Khalid Masood, and finished by stressing the importance of everybody standing together to defeat Neil Basu.
Having that microphone here, not to be shortcoming in protecting officers at Westminster. Even the possibility that the Metropolitan Police Service lost the check to prevent the murder of one of our officers is unacceptable, and we are deeply sorry.
Down the street, people. The terror attack Khalid Masood was lawfully killed. Masood murdered 5 people in March last year, including PC Keith Palmer, before he was shot dead outside the House of Parliament. After the inquest, Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, the head of UK counter-terrorism policing, accepted there were shortcomings in the protection of police officers in the Palace of Westminster. Our correspondent Jenny Kumar is outside the Old Bailey in central London. Jenny.
Well, this inquest is focused on those moments shortly before Khalid Massoud was shot dead. He had basically stabbed PC Palmer near the front gates of Parliament, and he was confronted by some close protection officers who shouted a warning before firing 3 shots. He received medical attention at the scene when he was taken to hospital where he was declared dead. The judge here today directed the jury that the only conclusion they could reach was that he was lawfully killed, and he said that the armed officer involved honestly believed it was necessary and reasonable to shoot him. Now, giving his reaction, the Detective Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Neil Battle, gave these comments this afternoon.
PC Palmer was posthumously awarded the George Medal for Gallantry, having died a hero as he bravely confronted an armed terrorist while on duty protecting Palmer. I know I speak on behalf of colleagues from across the Met when expressing our deepest sympathy to PC Palmer's family and the families and loved ones of all the victims of this difficult crime. Our thoughts are also with the survivors, including some of our own officers who were seriously injured in this attack. I would like to once again thank the Chief Coroner and the jury for their full and rigorous examination of the facts. In relation to Police Constable Palmer's death, the Chief Coroner identified shortcomings in the security system at the Palace of Westminster, including the supervision of those engaged in those duties. We unreservedly accept this conclusion. And as I said at the conclusion of the first part of the inquest, which examined the deaths of the victims, even the possibility that the Metropolitan Police Service lost the chance to prevent the murder of one of our officers is unacceptable, and we are deeply sorry.
And he also praised PC Nick Carlisle. He roughly tackled Khalid Massoud, and then later when he had been unarmed, he then handcuffed him despite fears that he may have had a suicide death from. Daniel Sanford has this report.
The first the police protecting Parliament knew of the Westminster attack was when a 4x4 smashed into the perimeter fence. Then the driver, Khalid Massoud, ran round the corner to the main gates of the House of Commons.
It was looking directly in the eye for that 5 metres. He was clearly coming to that in Parliament, and I believe it was having an intention, the sole intention to kill police officers.
PC Nick Carlisle was guarding the gates with his colleague, the PC Keith Palmer. He told them he saw Khalid Massoud knock PC Palmer to the ground and start stabbing him with 2 large knives. He'd known PC Palmer for 10 years.
The attacker stood over him, his shoulders working as he clearly attacked Keith on the floor. Action clearly needed to be taken there, but already started running forward. It's right inside to me. I'd lined him up, I was striking with a shoulder guard, and not the attacker to his right side and put it to the floor. But when I was almost behind the senior coming, we turned to face stage, knives up, and I could veer away to the side. I didn't know that, seeing the CCTV, Keith was able to get up at that time and make his escape towards the vehicle blocker.
He told me he and PC Palmer ran towards Parliament, pursued by Khalid Massoud.
Already inside, coming to the corridor, the 2 close protection officers with a hand on the steering, veered out of their line of sight to give them the opportunity to shoot and point out the attack, indicating and making it clear who he was and where he was coming from. He was just behind us, being 5 meters behind us. There was a warning, there was a volley of shots, and they put him to the ground and shot him.
The pistol shots echoed around Westminster. This was the moment just after the officers opened fire. PC Carlisle can be seen to their left, but then he stepped forward again to deal with Khalid Massoud.
Then him getting back into the fight after being injured was detonating any explosive. I got forward and handcuffed him in the rear stack and made sure that the other detonator that couldn't be used.
So you handcuffed him even though you were worried that he might be wearing a suicide vest?
Yeah, because they had to fight.
Khalid Massoud was taken to hospital but died from his gunshot wounds. PC Carlisle went on to help in the effort to save his injured colleague, doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But PC Chief Palmer also died at the scene. Daniel Sanford, BBC News.
Now, in his summing up, the judge also defended the actions of Sir Craig Mackey, who's received some criticism this week, having given evidence saying that he locked himself in his car as the attack unfolded. Now, giving reaction to say the Deputy Assistant Commissioner Neil Basson also defended Sir Craig, saying that some of the comments about him were abhorrent, and agreeing with the judge that he couldn't have done anything to stop the attack, that he had no protection, and that what he did was sensible and proper.
Jenny, thank you very much. Jenny Kumar at the Albany. In the past few minutes, an inquest jury has found that the man who carried out the Westminster Bridge terrorist attack, Khalid Masood, was lawfully killed. He murdered 5 people in March last year before he was shot dead outside the Houses of Parliament. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports.
The first the police protecting Parliament knew of the Westminster attack was when a 4x4 smashed into the perimeter fence. Then the driver, Khalid Masood, ran round the corner to the main gates of the House of Commons.
It was looking directly in the eye for that 5 minutes. He was clearly coming to it in Parliament, and I believe it was coming with intentions, the sole intention to kill police officers.
PC Nick Carlisle was guarding the gates with his colleague, PC Keith Palmer. He told me he saw Khalid Masood knock PC Palmer to the ground and start stabbing him with 2 large knives. He'd known PC Palmer for 10 years.
The attacker stood over him, I got his shoulders working as the clearly attacked Keith on the floor. Action clearly needed to be taken, but already started running forward. It was right inside to me. I'd lined him up, I was going to strike him at the shoulder guards and lock his traffic to the right side and put him to the floor. But when I was almost upon him, the scene coming, he turned to face head, knives up, and I had to veer away to the side. I didn't go there, but at that time I turned on the CCTV, people there to get up at that time, and they did escape towards the vehicle blocker.
He told me he and PC Palmer ran towards Parliament, pursued by Khalid Masood.
Already in sight, connect the cobbles with 2 close techniques with a hand on his gun. Veer out of their line of sight to give them the opportunity to shoot and put out the attacker, indicating, making it clear who he was and where he was coming from. He was just behind him, it's been 5 minutes behind him. There was a warning, there was a volley of shots, and they put him to the ground and shot him.
The pistol shots echoed around Westminster. This was the moment just after the officers opened fire. PC Carlisle could be seen just to their left, but then he stepped forward again to deal with Khalid.
Back into the fight of the big detonating and explosive. I got forward, I handcuffed him in the rear side, and so detonator that couldn't be used.
So you hang up immediately, you were worried that he might be wearing suicide bombs.
Yeah, taken out.
Khalid Masood was taken to hospital but died from his gunshot wounds. PC Carlisle went on to help in the effort to save his injured colleague, doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But PC Keith Palmer also died at the scene. Daniel Sanford,
correspondent Jenny Kumar is at the Old Bailey where those inquests have been heard, and the Metropolitan Police talking at some length this afternoon as well, Jenny.
Yes, that's right. The Detective Assistant Commissioner Basson gave a statement in reaction to the verdict. He expressed his deepest sympathy to the victims, survivors and their families. He said they've endured a terrible suffering and that was the result of one individual's barbaric actions. He also praised the officers on duty that day, and he spoke of the heartbreaking evidence given by the bodyguard who shot Masood. He said it was a reminder of the terrible distress caused when you take another person's life. But he also came to the defence of Sir Craig Mackey. He was the Chief Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. This week he gave evidence saying that he locked himself in his car when he was in New Palace Yard as the attack unfolded. And Neil Basson described the criticism that Sir Craig has received about this as abhorrent.
There was nothing that Craig could have done to have stopped Masood, or to have saved PC Palmer or any others from being injured. Craig was in a car accompanied by 2 civilian staff members. Neither he nor the two civilian staff had any protective equipment with them.
Neil Basson also went on
Stop fucking doing No. Oh.
to pay tribute to P.C. Palmer, who was fatally stabbed near the front gates of Parliament. He described him as dedicated, well-loved and courageous. He also said that he accepted the coroner's conclusions last week that there were shortcomings in the security of Parliament, and he said he was deeply sorry if the Metropolitan Police had missed any chance to save P.C. Palmer's life.
Thank you, Jennifer, following the inquests at the Old Bailey. Good afternoon.